Hi everybody, it's Jennifer. Today I want to show you how to work with landscape, but I also want to show you how to work in layers. So what we're going to do today is we're going to add a layer and then I'm going to dry it and then we're going to add another layer so that we can get the layers in the sky to be clear and not muddy. So today I'm using cobalt blue, a little bit of cobalt teal, vermilion hue, opera rose, and burnt umber. So first thing I'm going to do is it's kind of a night scene where it's really dusk and there's just a little bit of light in the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and put the brighter colors in first, which would be my vermilion with a little bit of opera rose. So I'm going to take my vermilion, I'm going to add a little opera rose to it. And now what I want to do is I'm going to wet the paper, so I'm going to be working wet into wet. I'm going to wet the whole sky all the way down to the horizon line. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of that opera rose vermilion mix, and I'm going to put it right down here. And then I'm going to pull out the extra color in the brush, a little bit of water, and I'm going to work that color in. I want it a little heavier right here, so I'm just going to put a few extra little dots of it right there. And then I'm also working in an area down here that's going to be water. I'm going to put a little bit of that color right down here. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is dry this layer. So this layer is now dry, and I can add my next layer on top. So I'm going to take my brush, pick up a little bit of that cobalt teal. I want it really, really light. I'm going to water it down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-wet this first layer. I want to be really careful when I do this. I don't want to go back and forth a bunch of times. I just want to go over it one time. If I keep going back and forth over the same area, I could relift that color, so I want to be careful about that. I have a bunch of water right here, so I'm going to use the brush as a sponge and just try to get rid of some of this extra right here. Okay, now we're going to take that cobalt teal and we are going to add the cobalt teal right over top. And the same thing at the bottom. I want to re-wet this and put just a little bit of that cobalt teal in this area. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm going to wet this layer, dry this layer so that I can put the last layer on in the sky. Okay, so now this layer is dry and we're gonna add our third layer onto the sky. So I'm gonna wet my brush again. Actually, I'm gonna get a little bit of clean water just to make sure I don't get any extra pigment on there. And same thing, I am gonna wet this part again. And the same thing down here, I'm gonna wet this. And then I'm going to take a mix of my cobalt blue and my vermilion, and I'm going to start adding some clouds. There's a little line of trees right here too. And take a smaller brush. Add a few more clouds. There's a lot of water over here in this corner, so I'm going to just take the extra water up with the brush. So I can get some soft clouds over here. And then there were a few kind of big swoopy clouds on top. And then as these start to set up, I'll add a little bit more color to them. And then the same thing down here, I want to add some of this in the reflection. Then I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm just going to pull out some of this so I don't end up with a line right through here. So I'm going to take a little bit more of that mix and I'm just going to go in here and add a little bit more in a few places. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and I'm going to dry this layer. Okay, now that this layer is dry, I'm going to add my tree line on top of the sky. So I'm going to use cobalt blue, the vermilion, and a little bit of the burnt umber. I'm going to take a round brush. I'm going to add the tree line, and I want to make sure that the top of the tree line is not even. So I'm going to make it kind of push my brush up into some places, but I definitely don't want it too even or it won't look like a tree line. Now, if I didn't dry the paper, this color would bleed into the other color, and sometimes that's okay, but if you want something that's a little bit sharper edges, then definitely dry it and then come back and add another layer. Same thing on this side, I'm just pushing the brush up in a few places just to try to get an uneven line. Okay. Putting a little bit more dark at the bottom of this one. All right, now there's a little bit of that same tree line in the reflection, so I definitely want to get that in there. Doing the same thing. My brush is getting a little drier, and that's okay because the color will get a little lighter, and that's perfect for a reflection. So the same thing on this side. I'm going to get a little bit lighter. And I want to try to think about it like a mirror. You can even turn your paper upside down. It might help a little bit when you're doing the reflections. I'm just going to soften this edge right here with a little bit of water. The same right here. I'm just adding a little bit of water detail right here. And now what I'm going to do is dry this layer. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to start working on putting all the sand in. So same gray mix that I've been using, a little lighter. Okay, same thing down here. So this is the first layer we're going to have in the sand. We're going to have several layers in the sand, and we'll do the same thing. Make this a little darker. Okay, so I'm going to dry this layer so that I can keep adding new layers. Okay, so this layer is dry, and so now I want to keep working on the sand. There was a little bit of a lighter area right through here, so I'm going to leave that. And then I'm going to blend out this edge. And then I'm going to come down here and work on this area. So this area down here is going to have a dark edge where it meets the light. And it's actually got a little bit of pattern that ripples into the water. So I am just putting little marks to define the sand in this area. And make sure it's fairly light when I go back in space. I don't want it too dark, the detail, as I get up the picture plane. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this layer dry so that I can add another layer. Okay, so now we have this layer dry and we're going to add the next layer. Same color, we're just changing the value, adjusting the value. So I'm going to take a round brush, and there was a little edge right here. I'm going to put a little bit more detail into this color shift. And I want to make sure that I edge this little reflective area. what we have to do is we have to get in here and put a little bit more detail. And all I'm really doing is trying to define this space just a little bit more. And my mark should always be a little larger in the front, and then as they go back in space, they're going to get smaller. So I want to pick up a slightly lighter color to fill this in so it's not so dark. Just put a little water on my brush. Okay, I'm just making sure I think I've got all my darks and lights where I need to have them. And I think this one's pretty close. If I was going to finish this, I probably would put one more round of darks in the bottom just to really make sure I have all those darks set. But this will give you a really good idea how to work in those layers. So again, if you want to keep all your layers clean without your colors running into each other or without working wet into wet, just use your hair dryer. You can let it air dry, it just take a lot longer. Use your hair dryer, dry the layer, and then work into the next layer. And if you have any questions, email me.